The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest like a living thing. Claire lay awake in the bedroom, ears straining, when a faint creak whispered from below. She froze. The basement door, long sealed, had never moved since they bought the house. Yet there it was, ajar, as if inviting her to step closer. A ripple of unease crawled up her spine, then a laugh. A clear, childish giggle echoed up the stairwell, soft and hollow, playful yet impossibly wrong. Claire's hand found Evan's shoulder, shaking him awake. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, heart hammering. He laughed it off. "It's probably the wind," but even as he spoke, the temperature dropped and the laughter repeated, closer, teasing, familiar, yet utterly alien. Their daughter, Lila, stirred in her sleep, murmuring, "He's laughing again," her words sending an icy shiver through the room. They realized, with a sinking certainty, that whatever was below had been waiting. And now it was awake. Claire's hand hovered over the basement doorknob, her knuckles whitening as a shiver ran down her spine. Evan hovered behind her, trying to maintain calm, but the air was thick with tension. Another laugh echoed, longer this time, almost teasing, almost pleading. Lila, standing at the top of the stairs now, whispered, "It's waiting for us," her voice trembling yet oddly steady. Claire swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "We just need to see if it's safe," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The air felt heavier with every step toward the basement, and even Evan's rational mind couldn't ignore the cold presence seeping from below, tugging at the edges of their courage. The basement smelled of damp wood and something else, something sweet, almost cloying, that made Claire's stomach churn. With a hesitant push, the door creaked open fully, revealing pitch-black stairs leading into a void. Evan's flashlight flickered, casting brief, dancing shadows along the walls. Lila's small hand clutched hers tightly. "I can hear him," she whispered, voice trembling. The laugh came again, closer now, circling them, bouncing off walls that seemed to stretch unnatural. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity, an unbearable, gnawing curiosity, kept their feet rooted at the top of the stairs. The first step down felt like sinking into ice. Claire's breath came shallow, each movement a battle against the rising panic. Evan's voice trembled as he called her name softly, as if speaking too loudly might awaken something further. Lila's gaze was drawn downward, unafraid, almost knowing. The laughter turned melodic, almost teasingly sweet, as if the basement itself were alive, watching, judging. Every shadow flickered like a figure just beyond reach, and Claire felt a cold hand grip the hollow of her stomach, reminding her that some doors, once opened, refused to close. By the third step, the air had thickened, sticky with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. The laughter now surrounded them, echoing from all directions, impossible to locate. Claire's heartbeat roared in her ears. "Evan, we need to go back," she whispered, but Lila tugged on her hand. "Not yet," the child insisted, voice steady, almost commanding. It was then that the first whisper followed, a voice soft, familiar, calling Claire's name from deep within the shadows. The rational world dissolved in an instant. The basement had chosen to speak, and they had no choice but to listen. Claire's flashlight quivered as shadows stretched unnaturally along the damp walls. Every corner seemed alive, breathing. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against their ears. Lila whispered, "It's here," her voice firm as though she alone understood. A chill crawled over Claire's spine as the temperature dropped sharply. Evan tried to rationalize, muttering about drafts and old pipes, but even his voice sounded distant, hollow. Then the first figure emerged. A tall, indistinct silhouette at the bottom of the stairs, barely visible in the flickering light, yet undeniably present, shifting and pulsing like a shadow breathing. The figure moved, silently gliding across the bottom of the stairs, neither fully human nor completely formless. Claire felt her breath catch, muscles frozen. Evan's flashlight flickered again, throwing the figure into sudden clarity. A face, pale and smiling unnaturally, yet featureless in its eyes. Lila stepped forward, voice calm. "He doesn't mean to hurt us," she said almost reverently. Claire froze, glancing at Evan, whose disbelief was slowly giving way to terror. The basement seemed to pulse with an otherworldly rhythm, shadows twisting like living veins, enveloping them in a darkness that whispered secrets too vast to understand. A soft hum began to vibrate through the basement, low and almost musical. Claire felt her knees weaken. The shadow raised a hand, and a chilling voice, impossibly close and far away at once, whispered, "You shouldn't have come down." Lila's expression did not waver. She reached out, as if offering friendship. The figure paused, tilting its head, the air thick with an ancient, almost mournful presence. Evan's rational mind shattered. There was no explanation. They were standing in a space that obeyed different laws, where laughter and terror intertwined, and the house itself seemed to be watching their every move. Claire's voice trembled as she whispered, "What do you want?" The figure responded not with words, but with a swirl of cold air and the faint echo of a child's giggle, a sound simultaneously joyful and terrible. The basement seemed to expand, swallowing the edges of the room, and for the first time, Claire realized they were not visitors here. They were intruders. Lila stepped closer, her small hand brushing the edge of the shadow, and it recoiled slightly, like a living thing startled by innocence. Evan grabbed Claire's arm, eyes wide. "We should leave," he said, but the path upward felt distant, as if the basement itself had stretched beyond its walls. Suddenly, the shadow lunged upward, dissolving into a swirl of darkness that seemed to consume the staircase. The laughter returned, echoing from every corner, a chorus of unseen children, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Claire clutched Lila, Evan's hands shaking as he tried to shield them. The basement, once a simple storage space, had become a threshold to something far older, far more aware, and far more dangerous than any of them could imagine. The first act of terror had concluded, but the house was far from done. Every creak, every echo, every whisper promised that the nights to come would be far worse. The next night, the laughter returned at precisely 2 a.m., echoing through the empty house with an unnatural precision. Claire jolted awake, heart pounding, the air thick and cold around her. Evan groaned, rubbing his eyes, refusing to look toward the basement, though the sound seemed to wrap around them, curling through the walls. Lila sat upright in her bed, eyes wide, whispering, "He's impatient tonight." Claire clutched her daughter's hand, but the house seemed to stretch and breathe, each shadow pulsating with movement. Every creak of the floorboards was amplified, every distant tap or thump echoing like footsteps right behind them, reminding them that the basement's presence had extended beyond its walls. The laughter shifted tones, closer now, echoing in the hallway outside their room. Claire and Evan exchanged terrified glances, their previous rational explanations evaporating. Lila padded softly toward the door, drawn as if by instinct, murmuring, "He wants us to play." Claire's throat tightened. Fear and disbelief tangled in her chest. The house seemed to respond, groaning and rattling, floorboards stretching unnaturally under unseen weight. Each heartbeat felt like an audible drum, syncing with the echoing giggles, pulling them toward the basement whether they wanted to go or not. They descended again, each step a battle against the oppressive cold that seemed to cling to their bones. The basement's darkness had deepened since last night, shadows crawling along walls like ink, dripping from corners and ceiling beams. Lila hummed softly, a melody that seemed to calm the malevolent air for brief moments. Claire felt the walls pulse under her fingertips, a subtle vibration that was neither alive nor mechanical, but something beyond comprehension. The laughter now danced around them, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once, teasing, testing, daring them to retreat. The figure appeared again, closer, more defined, childlike in shape, but with an unsettling distortion to its features. It moved like a living shadow, drifting without sound, yet every movement carried intent. Claire wanted to scream, but no sound came. Evan's rational mind shattered completely. He could only stare as the shadow paused, tilting its head at Lila. "Hey, likes you," Lila whispered. The room seemed to bend inward, the walls compressing around them as if the house itself had noticed the bond between the child and the presence, testing, probing, assessing their fear. Then the laughter changed, slightly higher, sharper, urgent. The shadow lunged forward, dissolving into a swirl of black mist that moved like smoke, filling the room, surrounding them. Claire stumbled, clutching Lila, Evan trying to reach for something, anything to fight back. The basement had become a living trap, expanding and contracting with each heartbeat, laughter reverberating in every corner. For the first time, Claire realized that escaping might not be enough. They were no longer just visitors. They were part of the house now, bound to its shadows, to its laughter, and to whatever waited at the very bottom of the stairs. The house had begun to change around them. Hallways stretched impossibly long, doors leading to rooms that weren't there yesterday. Claire felt her head spin as she tried to orient herself, every familiar object slightly out of place. Evan muttered under his breath, "It's like the house knows us." Lila wandered ahead, her small hand brushing the wall as if reading invisible grooves. The laughter was no longer bound to the basement. It reverberated through the walls, the ceiling, even beneath their feet. Shadows flickered unnaturally, responding to their movements, as if the house itself were alive and aware of every thought, every fear. Time no longer flowed normally. The clock on the wall spun backward and then forward, each tick echoing unnaturally loud. Claire's pulse raced. Evan tried to steady himself, but his reflection in a warped mirror didn't match his movements. Lila giggled softly, moving as though the distortions were ordinary. The laughter twisted again, layering over itself, now a chorus of dozens of unseen voices, circling, teasing, daring them to succumb. The house was no longer just a place. They were trapped inside its consciousness, and the basement had become the epicenter of a power that didn't obey human rules. Claire reached the basement door again, now impossibly far from where she remembered, yet always within sight. The stairs seemed to elongate with every step closer, stretching into darkness. Evan's hands shook as he tried to follow, flashlight beam quivering, but the light bent oddly, revealing shapes that shouldn't exist. Lila's voice echoed from behind them, singing softly to the shadows. The laughter responded, now playful, mocking and cruel. Each step down the stairs felt like walking into an abyss that was alive, aware and hungry for their fear. The basement itself now pulsed, breathing in rhythm with their fear. Claire felt the floorboards shift beneath her feet, subtly, but enough to throw her balance. Evan called her name, voice echoing strangely, almost from inside his own head. Lila's small hands traced the edge of the swirling shadows, unafraid. The laughter became a symphony, echoing in every direction, seeming to emerge from the walls, floor, and ceiling simultaneously. The house was no longer just haunted. It was sentient, and it had marked them, bending the very fabric of reality to toy with their senses. The final step down the stairs brought them to the heart of the basement. Darkness pooled like liquid, absorbing every beam of light. Claire's hands shook violently as she reached toward Lila, who now stood in the center, gazing up at a shadowy figure that seemed to expand and contract with the rhythm of the laughter. Evan's rational mind had completely vanished. He could only stare, paralyzed. The basement had become a living entity, a trap woven from fear and sound. Every echo, every shadow, every heartbeat was a thread in its design, and the family had become entwined in its malevolent, unyielding will. Claire's vision blurred, the walls around her stretching and contracting as if breathing. She blinked, and the basement seemed to shift positions, stairs rising where there had been none, shadows melting into shapes that resembled faces she didn't recognize. Evan's voice cracked, calling her name, but it sounded distant, echoing backward as though swallowed by the house itself. Lila hummed softly, her small voice cutting through the chaos like a thread of sanity. The laughter, her laughter now, seemed to imitate them, mocking, twisting their emotions, and forcing their fear into shapes that they could see, hear, and feel with every fiber of their being. Evan's rational mind began to fracture. Each shadow seemed to whisper secrets, promises, and threats that felt intimately tailored to his fears. The laughter now mimicked voices from his past, friends, colleagues, strangers, all speaking in riddles he couldn't decipher, echoing endlessly. Claire grabbed his arm, desperate to anchor him, but even she could feel the house tugging at her memories, twisting recollections into illusions. Lila's small hand reached for Evan, and the shadow paused, almost hesitant, as if acknowledging a fragile connection. But the presence was patient. It had all the time it needed to unravel them completely. The family's sense of time dissolved. Minutes stretched into hours, the basement folding in on itself. Claire felt the cold fingers of despair grip her chest. Lila whispered, "He's hungry for more," and the sound of her own voice repeating back at her, distorted, mocking, made her flinch. The laughter was now omnipresent, vibrating through the floors, the walls, the ceiling, and their very bones. Each echo seemed to manipulate their perception of space. Stairs led to nowhere, doors opened into black voids, and even the flashlight's beam bent, refusing to illuminate the basement properly. Reality was no longer a reliable guide. Only fear, only the house, and the laughter remained. Claire tried to speak, but her words emerged distorted, twisted by the house into a mockery of her intentions. Evan attempted to move, yet each step felt heavier, resisted by some unseen weight. Lila's humming had grown louder, almost commanding the shadows to pause and listen. The presence began to form shapes, tentative figures of people they knew, echoes of past joys and fears, each one frozen in twisted mimicry. Claire's heart thumped against her ribs as she realized the house wasn't just alive. It was rehearsing their memories, feeding on their terror, shaping it into a performance meant solely for them. The final crescendo of the night arrived suddenly. The laughter erupted, layering over itself, deafening, a chorus of impossibilities. The basement expanded into a void, swallowing light, sound, and sanity. Claire clutched Lila, feeling Evan pressed close behind them, their combined fear almost palpable in the thick, vibrating air. Then, for the first time, the shadow moved deliberately, coalescing into a semi-human shape, smiling in a way that promised both understanding and terror. The house was no longer just a trap. It was a sentient predator, and tonight, it had them fully within its grasp. Claire forced herself to step forward, Lila clutching her hand tightly. Evan's flashlight quivered in his grasp, illuminating the shifting shadows as the basement pulsed around them. The shadow hovered at the center, its semi-human form stretching unnaturally, smiling with a cruel, otherworldly intelligence. Claire's voice, steady despite the fear, cut through the echoing laughter. "We're not yours," she said, defiance trembling in every syllable. The presence paused, tilting its head as if curious, studying them. Lila hummed again, small and calm, almost daring the shadow to act. For the first time, the family felt the faintest crack in the basement's power. The basement's power. The shadow lunged, dissolving into a swirl of darkness that rushed toward them. But Lila's small voice rang out, firm and unwavering. "Stop," she shouted, and the swirl paused, hesitated. Claire realized the key wasn't strength or reason. It was their bond, their awareness, their courage. Together they stood, shoulders squared, hearts pounding. The shadow recoiled slightly, its form flickering, uncertain. For the first time, the family wasn't reacting. They were asserting themselves, pushing back against the force that had toyed with them for nights on end. The basement shook violently, walls twisting and moaning as if the house itself were enraged. The shadow now attempted to envelop them, tendrils of darkness reaching outward, but Claire grabbed Lila and Evan, forming a human chain. Their combined courage resonated like a pulse through the basement, meeting the darkness with warmth, clarity, and defiance. Lila hummed again, louder this time, her melody weaving into their heartbeat. The shadow shrieked, not a sound of pain, but surprise, and flickered as if unable to comprehend resistance. For the first time, the family was not prey. They were a force of their own. The shadow faltered, its form destabilizing, fragments of darkness pulling inward like smoke before a gust of wind. Lila's small voice carried strength, echoing through the basement. "You don't belong here." The shadow hesitated, then wavered, dissolving into the mist that had once animated the room. The oppressive cold lifted slightly, replaced by an eerie stillness. Claire and Evan breathed heavily, gripping Lila tightly, hearts pounding, aware that the presence was retreating, but not gone. The basement seemed to sigh, the shadows lingering in tentative shapes, watching, waiting. Claire's voice shook as she whispered, "It's retreating. For now." Evan exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering terror flooding his expression. Lila smiled faintly, small hands still gripping theirs, calm and resolute. The basement was quiet, but the air hummed with a residual energy, a reminder that the house was alive, aware, and patient. They had survived the confrontation, but the sense of being watched lingered. Every shadow, every draft, every whisper was a promise that the game was far from over. Tonight, they had won a battle, but the house had not yet surrendered its secrets. The house waited. Claire awoke to an unnatural stillness, her body tense, senses stretched taut. The clock read 1:59 a.m., a single minute before the inevitable. Evan sat beside her, silent, flashlight in hand, scanning the hallway. Lila's small form sat between them, eyes wide, yet unnervingly calm. The basement door stood closed, but the air around it vibrated with anticipation. Claire's throat tightened as the faintest giggle echoed from below, the laughter both distant and intimately near. This night would decide whether they would survive, or whether the house would claim them entirely. The basement door creaked open slowly, deliberately, the sound amplified in the dead silence. Claire grabbed Evan's hand tightly, their fingers entwined. Lila stepped forward, small but determined. The laughter grew, layering into a cacophony of impossible voices, echoing from every corner of the house. Shadows began to crawl along the walls, forming strange, humanoid silhouettes. The family moved as one toward the stairs, hearts pounding, breath visible in the suddenly freezing air. Every instinct screamed to run, yet they pressed forward, united, ready to face the darkness that had haunted them for nights. The basement swallowed them in darkness, stairs stretching longer than memory allowed. The semi-human shadow coalesced again, taller, more menacing, yet faltering under the family's courage. Lila's small hand glowed faintly with a warm light, humming her melody, anchoring the family in reality. Claire and Evan held her on either side, their own fear transmuted into defiance. The shadow shrieked, twisting in confusion, its form dissolving into tendrils of mist that pulsed with the rhythm of the house. Tonight, they would either break free or be consumed entirely. Claire took a deep breath and spoke firmly. "You do not have us." The basement seemed to quiver at her words. Evan added, voice strong despite fear, "We leave together." The shadow convulsed, the darkness around them unraveling, as if struggling against an invisible force. Lila's humming intensified, melodic and unwavering, filling the basement with warmth that clashed violently with the shadows. Slowly, the oppressive cold lifted, the walls softened, and the floorboards settled. The house resisted, but the family's unity, their courage, and their refusal to be broken became stronger than the malevolent presence. As the first light of dawn seeped through the windows, the house fell silent. The basement door was closed, the shadows gone, but a faint echo of laughter lingered, a reminder that the house remembered. Claire, Evan, and Lila held each other, hearts still racing but alive. They had survived the final night, faced the darkness, and emerged united. The house remained a quiet sentinel of memories, secrets, and patience, but the family had reclaimed their courage. Together, they turned away from the basement, stepping into the new day, wary yet unbroken, knowing that their bond was stronger than any shadow that lingered in the corners of their home.